we're going to go ahead and get started, although some people may trickle in again due to the weather. But thank you all so much for coming to this event. It's our first event that we're organizing specifically for Eritrea's Independence Day at the People's Forum. So I wanted to thank the People's Forum for hosting us, the team. Y'all are really instrumental in moving forward and making sure that Eritrea is on the map. So I appreciate that. And then I also want to shout out the National Union of Eritrean Women, who are these amazing ladies that are organizing all the food, and Buna, and I just thank you so much, so much, as well as the National Council of Eritrean Americans for sponsoring this event. And I'm so excited to get started. One of the things that I will mention is we are live streaming this event. So there are going to be quite a few people tuning in, and we're going to have a speaker also tuning in via Zoom shortly. But again, thank you so much for coming. I first want to start, if everyone can, please rise. We're going to do a moment of silence for our martyrs, those who have fallen and fought for our independence. So please take a minute to bow your heads. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm just going to go through tonight's agenda real quick. So let me see if I'm doing this right. Oh, okay. So first, we're going to have a keynote by our amazing keynote speaker here, Her Excellency, the UN Ambassador, Sophia Tesfamariam. Afterwards, we're going to have a brief video intermission. One of the important things that I've realized that I think is important for people to have access to is like video footage and really getting to see what the Eritrean people did and what an awesome feat it was for them to be able to come out victorious and remain independent in 1991. And then afterwards, we're going to have a brief panel discussion. We have a couple of speakers here from different generations. We have a former freedom fighter. We have an organizer, two organizers that are really going to be able to speak to the past, Eritrea's past, present, and future today. So what that means for us and what we need to do as organizers in the United States, followed by a Q&A, and of course some food and spoon and just, mixing and mingling. So let's get started. I just want to first start off with recognizing that what the Eritrean people had been able to overcome is really incredible. Eritrea's colonial history actually goes as far back as the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century, followed by Italy, then Great Britain, before it was annexed by the United Nations as the 14th province of monarchical Ethiopia in 1952. So then after years of civil unrest under Emperor Haile Selassie, armed struggle began in 1961 and lasted for 30 years. After that, we gain our independence, and Eritrea is the only African nation that does not accept bilateral assistance or aid from the United States and has refused to adhere to structural adjustment programs since gaining their formal independence. What that means is a series of punishments in the form of sanctions, unfortunately, by Western powers. And it just goes to show that the disciplines and resiliency of the Eritrean people continue to shine even after 32 years of independence. And so today we're going to get a chance to really listen, discuss, and about what it means to be an independent Eritrea, an independent Eritrean in this time. So really excited to get started with our keynote speaker, Her Excellency Ambassador Sophia Tesfamariam.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Independence anniversary, everybody. I always complain I'm too short, and today I feel like this is, even with the heels. Oh, what an honor to be here, to be spending Independence Night with all of you. And I want to thank the People's Forum for hosting us today, and Miss Julianne for putting this event together. And when she said, "Would you come and speak?" Like, okay, you know, what are we going to speak about? You know, and independence. And I said, okay, so how much time do we have? You know, at the UN, they give you 3 minutes, 3 minutes to put the whole case together and do your summary. You know? So she goes 7 minutes. I'm like, oh, great. So I won't use up the whole 7 minutes, but you know, how do you talk about Eritrea's independence and what it entailed and what it was? You know, we are of a generation, folks my age, who were there during the struggle. So you get to see the everyday events, your parents and what they were doing in the community centers, especially the diaspora population. Of course, the ones inside of the country will also be involved in the struggles there. But for the diaspora, if we had parents, they spent a lot of time in the community center organizing, knocking on doors, writing letters, writing petitions, fundraising. And I remember when we were teenagers, almost every evening, all the cab drivers, all the workers went to the community center and ate there and paid $5 a meal. And the women would make the food and you would sell these $5 meals, and everybody didn't go home, didn't go to fancy restaurants, you know, no Starbucks, you know. Everybody went to the community center and paid the $5 and ate whatever meal you were gonna eat. So saving a lot of money to send to the field, saving money to send equipment. It was the National Union of Eritrean Women from around the world that got a lot of money together to buy sanitary pads machine so they could produce them in the field so you don't have to send them. Milk products for babies that were born in the field. Food products, you know. And then, of course, the hospital, the underground hospital was, you know, so many kilometers long, sending medicines and equipment to that place. And then after that, sending machinery to make the medicine so that they could make their own medicines and infusions and all that. So, you know, it's a long 30-year program of complete transformation of Eritrean society inside of Eritrea and in the outside that culminated in this very strong movement of a people. And Eritreans in DC would be thinking exactly the same thing and doing the same thing as New Yorkers. So you didn't feel like a stranger if you came to New York. You know, you could go knock and they said, there's a meeting in New York next Saturday. Okay, how many houses do they have in New York City? There's so-and-so has a place, so-and-so has a place, so-and-so has, okay, 5 of you go here, 5 of you go there, 6 of you go there. And if you had to sleep on the floor with your bags and blankets, so be it. But the people did that. And you could go to Europe and say, you know, I'm from the organization in Washington and I'm here for so-and-so meeting. Okay, so you sleep in that one's house, you go to this one place, you go to, you know. And I think that relationship that people built amongst themselves, amongst each other, amongst generations, is what's keeping us going today. And we don't feel like strangers going to New York or Minnesota. If you went to, you know, Louisiana or even Stillwater, Florida, you know, had Eritreans everywhere. You know, you had people in Alaska telling you, you know, you can come here. So I think that's what helps us with this. When they said the cohesive front for this theme in this independence, I think it's very befitting because we had that cohesion because we did these things. We did these things together. We struggled together, we cried together. You know, if there was a bad battle and you walked into the community center, you hear the women crying, you know something bad happened, you know, something went on. I remember the Masawa struggle, And when they captured Massawa in 1990, here, you could hear the sound. It was almost like a wailing sound coming out of the ECC. The community center was like, what happened? What happened? They said, I thought you guys said we liberated Massawa. They said, yes, but now they're bombing Massawa. The whole city is being bombed and kids are being killed and women are being displaced. So, but that was then. That was then. And I think that we thought then that the hardest part of the struggle, convincing people of the righteousness of the struggle, the justness of the struggle, the real history, that we were not secessionists. Every newspaper kept saying, this is a secessionist movement. We're like, no, we're not secessionists. We never belonged to Ethiopia. We were annexed. How did they do that? Well, the UN did that. The UN and the United States worked and federated Eritrea with Ethiopia. And when the Ethiopians broke the federation, abrogated the federation, nobody came back and punished them and said, hey, you're breaking the rules, you've broken a UN rule here, and these people were supposed to have an autonomous administration of their area. And so they got away with it. And Eritreans trekked all the way from Eritrea to the United Nations and asked, can't you do something? Do something. So the peaceful struggle went on for 10 years, asking, sending letters, begging, trying to convince somebody to listen to something that the Eritrean people were saying. And nobody did anything. And in September 1, 1961, the Eritrean people decided to launch an armed struggle. It was a very difficult struggle, and it cost us almost 65,000 people, and not to mention devastated villages, devastated infrastructures, destroyed homes, destroyed families, exiled families, dispersed families, and that went on for 30 years. When you think of 30-year war, you're thinking, it's a lifetime. My son is 27, and that's, his whole life would have been the struggle then. So we lost much, but I say on balance, we also gained a lot as a people. We have become stronger as a people because of what we went through. And I think the resilience that they talk about, they talk about at the UN every day. Communities need to build resilience against future shocks and the COVID and all this. I'm like, what do you know about resilience? You don't know about resilience that you've had bombs dropped over your homes, when you've had entire villages grazed, entire homes destroyed, entire families. So, yeah, the resilience came as a result of this hard struggle that they went through. And post-independence was supposed to be so happy. And the first couple of years, we were happy. The first couple of years, we were so eager to build this new nation, make it what we want, the aspirations of the Eritrean people. I want them to have this, I want them to have that. They must have this, they didn't have this. And for 2 years, we worked. First of all, we wanted to make it legal. So we spent 2 years, a government that had no World Bank money, no IMF money, nobody giving you anything because you're not recognized by the UN yet. So we had to get UN recognition. And in order to do that, we did the referendum of Eritrea, which we celebrated at the UN, actually. This year, we made sure that we took it to the UN and said, see, this is what you denied us 30 years ago. And so we conducted the independence referendum around the world, and Eritreans voted around the world, not just in Eritrea, but in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Saudi Arabia, even in India, some people in South America, and across the United States and Europe in almost every city. And the results were a resounding 98%, 98.9% for independence. And of course, Mr. Samir Sambar was the UN envoy who was sent by the Secretary General Boutros Ghali to conduct that historic event in Eritrea. So the first 2 years were happy, and we did get something done. And we went on, then we had to build a nation. And how do you build a nation? We had to build our institutions. We didn't have anything. We didn't have teachers. We didn't have schools. When the Ethiopians left, they left. They took their scholars, their teachers, their men, power, everything with them. So we had to really build institutions from scratch. And I think we're still building. It's just not easy to build an institution of government. And just barely 7 years into independence, then we got attacked again. And the war with Ethiopia broke out. That one was difficult because we just went through 30 years. We thought it was all done, and it was over nothing. It seemed like over nothing. It was like, why would you fight over a territory? Isn't that what the laws are for? Isn't that what the UN is for? Isn't that what the Security Council is for? But I think the Ethiopians got pushed into this war, and it lasted 2 years. We lost another 19,000, more villages destroyed, more people displaced, 70,000 at one time. And again, the Eritrean diaspora galvanized and mobilized to fight with the TPLF regime in Ethiopia. And in 2000, the United States, EU, AU, all the big guys, brokered a peace agreement with Ethiopia, the Algiers Peace Agreement, and it was signed in Algeria. That's why they call it the Algiers Agreement. And we had the EU, the United States, President Obasanjo, Siri from the EU, all these big guys who were supposed to be witnesses and guarantors of this agreement. But in 2002, after the Border Commission, I'm just going to condense the story and make it short because we could go on for days. But the Border Commission came as a result of the Algiers Agreement, and the Algiers Agreement said whatever decision the Boundary Commission comes up with was going to be final and binding. And both sides had to agree to that, and that's why they signed the agreement. Well, lo and behold, in 2002, April 13th, the Boundary Commission gave its decision. And I think it was 4 o'clock in the morning, a bunch of Eritrean activists were calling The Hague, trying to find out, who got this village, who did they give it to? And Minister Ali, at that time, our foreign minister, he said, don't worry, just calm down. When we're ready to announce, we will, but everything is okay. But then on the news, on Reuters, we see the Ethiopian foreign minister, and he's got all these journalists with him, and he goes, we got what we wanted and more. The Badame was awarded to Ethiopia. So you can imagine the shock that Eritreans were feeling at 4 in the morning when you see this minister of Ethiopia announcing that the village of Badame had been awarded to them. So then we had to look for this document. It was like, hurry up, if you have to scan it, if you have to fax it to us so that we know exactly what happened. We want to know who got this, who was awarded this. And so we did. The very next day, a few hours later, it didn't take long, we finally get the document and we find out that Badame was awarded to Eritrea, as it should have been, because there was no doubt in Eritrean mind that that territory belonged to us. But for the next 20 years, from 2002 until almost 2018, when Prime Minister Abiy took over Ethiopia, those territories remained occupied by Ethiopia. The Security Council refused to take any punitive actions against Ethiopians. All the guarantors disappeared. All the witnesses disappeared. And if they did show up, they showed up to say, how about you guys talk again? It's a final and binding decision, but how come you guys don't talk? Maybe if you have dialogue or something, there was a way of saying, let's reopen the case, revise the case, amend the case, amend the decision. But Eritrea stood her ground, and we just decided, okay, we know this was being awarded to us. We know our territories are going to be returned to us at some point. We will wait it out. In the meantime, we will rebuild our country. We will rebuild the dams. We will build new dams. We will build this nation and wait. And so when Ethiopia got the change of government, the first thing that Prime Minister Abiy did was say that he would accept the final and binding decision of the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission. And with that, the relationship with the Ethiopia was opened up again. And today we have cordial relations and good relations. And when the TPLF attacked Ethiopian government in November, Eritrea supported Ethiopian government and forces to fight TPLF, and we're hoping that this is the end of it and we don't have to worry about TPLF for the time being. But in the 20 years, despite the fact that they did not do anything to enforce the EEBC decision, what hurt Eritrea the most was the intense vilification campaign that was launched through the National Endowment of Democracy, through NDI, through so many other forms, the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty. And then the worst part of it all was that they were using Eritreans. They were using Eritreans to write about Eritrea, to go to the Human Rights Council and testify against Eritrea. So that went on until 2012, until today. The Special Rapporteur on Eritrea, the country-specific mandate on Eritrea at the Human Rights Council still persists till today, even though it doesn't have the support of the country in question. It doesn't have the support of the African group in Geneva. But every year it keeps coming up and it keeps being extended. But of course, they pay the bills, so I guess they don't mind paying the $500,000 to keep the rapporteur going year after year. And as far as Eritrea is concerned, we don't recognize that mandate, so we don't engage with the rapporteur. So not sure how he's going to produce his report. And we also were sanctioned for 9 years through the Security Council because supposedly we were supporting Al-Shabaab. And this is a country that has been fighting terrorism since its birth. You know, we were attacked in 1994 from Sudan. We wrote so many letters to the UN telling them, you know, Bin Laden is here. Terrorism is coming. Fundamentalist groups are here. Do something. But in the end, they decided Eritrea is the culprit. Eritrea needs to be punished. But we didn't support Al-Shabaab. And I think what got us into trouble with the United States was when they allowed Ethiopia to invade Somalia to get rid of the Union of Islamic Courts, we voiced our concern. So we got punished for voicing our concern and stating the truth of what Somalia's solution for Somalia's problems would have been at that time. So we got sanctioned for 9 years. And when this 2018 relationship with Ethiopia improved, and they signed peace agreements and visited each other's capitals, the United Nations decided to drop the sanctions. So you come in one day after 9 years and you unanimously vote to lift the sanctions against Eritrea with no explanation as to why the sanctions were there in the first place, or if you had found any reason for the sanctions to persist for the 9 years that they did, even though the Somali-Eritrea Monitoring Group for correct me if I'm wrong, Aman should know, 5 or 6 reports consecutively saying we did not find any proof of Eritrea's support for the Al-Shabaab group. But still, we got sanctioned. But the sanctions are debilitating. They affected the economy. They prevented us even from getting copiers. You know? They were checking boats that came into Eritrea. It was a very difficult 9 years of the sanctions, which were removed 2018. But I don't think the US was satisfied with just leaving it at that. And unfortunately, we were thinking that things were working and things would go better now that we have this good relationship with Ethiopia, and that the region had finally stabilized and the Horn of Africa was seeing peace for the first time in a long time, almost 70 years. But I don't think that set well with the United States, because the next thing I knew, and I didn't realize this until the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs came to see me, and I said, well, let me check up on what the US is thinking about Eritrea, and went to their website. And then I find this document, and it talks about all the things that they're going to do to Eritrea. And it was more of the same, plus, keep Eritrea away from China, keep Eritrea from Russia. Like, the Russians bombed Eritrea. Do you know our history? We were bombed by the Russians. We were bombed by Israel. We had cluster bombs. We had all napalm bombs dropped on us. Do you think we today will relinquish our sovereignty and our territorial integrity and our respect and dignity and support anybody for whatever reason that doesn't bode well for our self-interest? So it was very interesting. It was almost condescending that you would sit there and say, you're not going to be friends with that one, you're going to be friends with that one, or I'm going to decide who you're going to be associating with. But one of the things that struck me was they actually put it in that document and they said, we are not working with Eritrea now. We are working on a post-Isaias Eritrea because he's too old and he'll be gone soon. And I'm like, okay, I campaigned for Obama and Biden was his assistant then. He was the vice president then. And Biden was way older than my president. So I'm like, would the United States like it if we wrote, well, your president is going to die before mine because yours is older? But we don't do that because we're civilized people. You don't talk to people that way. You don't talk to nations that way. You don't talk about leaders in that sense. But the arrogance, it was almost a turnoff for me before she even came to my office. I'm like, okay, so how do you improve relations with a country when the hostility is there, the sanctions, the executive orders, the defamation, of course, the pious people of Eritrea who've lived in harmony for centuries, way before colonialists even came to our territories, and who've had monasteries that predate, the 500 ADs, very Christian population, very Muslim population, the oldest mosque in Africa, the first mosque in Africa in Eritrea. And where do we end up? On the list of countries of concern for the United States for religious freedom. So then I'm thinking, okay, these dubious lists are lists for defamation, for creating narratives, but they're going everywhere. They're being distributed in these networks, and I signed up for so many networks, the Voice of the Martyrs, the Persecution.net, and every morning I was getting some, Eritrea did this, Eritrea did that. So this is how it works. So this is how this machine works. This is how your name can go from bright gold and red to black in one day. How they can create this image of a country and a people they know absolutely nothing about. And so it was scary for us for a while, but then we decided, okay, this is a people that fought against guns and bullets and bombs and tanks, so what's a few words? Let's organize and beat this narratives too, and that's what the Eritrean community did. And of course, our youth are more versed than the rest of us on their iPhones and their social medias and Facebook and writing articles, and where's Simon? Writing very strong articles in defense of Eritrea and presenting at the Human Rights Council also, and attending the Human Rights Council and talking to lawmakers and talking to congressmen and journalists. And so here we are today, despite all this and many more and much more that I don't remember, I don't remember details, but there is one paper that we put together that talks about the unprovoked hostilities against Eritrea by the United States. And we have two documents that were produced in 2014 that cover some of the many things that the United States has done. And of course, if the United States does something, Europe copies, And here's a new country, and today, or was it yesterday, I was reading something. Here's this new country that needs everything. Everything's being built from scratch. And you have this population where you've lost 65,000 of your finest and bestest, and yet you're not allowed to use your own people, your own children, your own sons and daughters to rebuild your country. So in a very stupid I call it whitewashing of slavery. They labeled the Eritrean National Service as slavery. These youth are being made to work and build their country. Shame on them. Like, national service is not new. It's not a new phenomenon. You know, the Israeli children go from here to Israel to do their national service. And many countries in Europe still do national service. Ours was prolonged from the 18 months originally envisioned because of this war and the sanctions and the hostilities. What else are you going to do but protect your country? You know? But we're not allowed to do that. We shouldn't protect ourselves. So last night, or was it yesterday, they tweeted something. I guess it's a way of also messing up our independence celebrations. And a few years ago, I told them it's Eritrea. It's a new disease. You know, it attacks you every year when Eritrea is doing a holiday event or something. And these guys wrote something like, the national service in Eritrea is the third in the world on the list of slavery or something like that. Like, I hope the United States is first in line, you know. You brought slaves here to build your country across the Atlantic in shackles, on boats, stolen from villages, and you want to talk about slavery and tell us that it's the same as young Eritrean men and women working to rebuild their nation, you know. Go figure. You know. We'll leave it at that. But today we're here against all odds, like they say, still resilient and really hopeful this time, because there's peace in the neighborhood, except for Sudan. We have a few problems, but that will settle if there's no external interference. And once Sudan is settled, I think the Horn of Africa will have a new hope for the future, and the integration that they're talking about, the new work that IGAD wants to do, the African Union, and even the UN is hopeful that the Horn of Africa will finally get a chance to consolidate the peace and keep the promises that we want, you know, the Africa we want, but also the promises we want, not what somebody else is telling us. And so we can move on like the rest of the world and the rest of humanity, but never forgetting that there's many, many more other peoples that are still struggling and fighting for their freedom and their independence. And I think it behooves all Eritreans to listen, if nothing else, even if you can't do anything else. If anybody comes on your door and knocks and says, my people need help, you need to listen. Because that's what we did. We knocked on 1 million doors in the past, and we'll continue to knock on 1 million doors in the future, and hope that these kinds of forums, these kinds of discussions will also bring the ideas and the information to the forefront, so that we're not just relying on the BBCs and the CNNs to give us the narrative on what the world is like and how the world is rolling. So I thank you. Sorry if I'm past my 7 minutes. I'm never good with time. You know, thank you very much for having me here, and we always end everything with Zalalamawi Sigrin Samatatna, which means we always remember those who died for us to liberate Eritrea. And then always, 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 victory to the people, to the masses. Awat Nahafash.
Thank you so much to Ambassador Sophia. That was an incredible way to kick off this event. So the next item is a video intermission. This is an opportunity to actually see a lot of what the ambassador was talking about, the level of organization and sophistication that the Eritrean people had when they were fighting in the war. So let's cue the video.
In the past months, we were in need of a film projector, you know, for the cultural show. So we went in cinema hall, the biggest one, and we just took it. Or we pillaged it.
In the middle of the night?
In the middle of the night. In the daytime.
In the daytime?
Yeah, in the daytime.
No such deception is needed in the Sudan.
North, across the mountains and deserts, the supply lines of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front begin. Graham Greene would have it no other way. The colourful but somewhat conspiratorial atmosphere of this Red Sea port provides the perfect setting for a guerrilla operation. While largely dependent on its own resources, the EPLF is still forced to buy much of its basic food stocks, medicine and fuel from outside. Port Sudan is the headquarters of the Eritrean Relief Association. It handles no guns, just food, donated or bought with funds from Arab friends and trucked back across the deserts to Eritrea. How much of your supplies actually pass through the Sudan?
Supplies which come for the Eritrean Relief Association, actually most of it comes through the Sudan.
Are there any restrictions imposed upon you by the Sudanese, or do they just turn a blind eye to what you're doing?
Actually, I wouldn't say they turn a blind eye. They know what we are doing. This is a humanitarian activity, so they really help us.
It's the Ho Chi Minh Trail of the Horn, Liberation Road as the EPLF call it, 1,600 kilometers of rough-hewn track built by hand over a period of 4 years, an improvised road system that's the backbone of their entire operation. More than 1,000 lorries, nearly all of them captured from the Ethiopians, keep the supplies coming. They move mostly at night or under the cover of cloud. There is a constant threat of air raids, even in the more remote mountain areas. Scattered along its entire length is a network of repair shops, underground garages, and camouflage fuel dumps. Like nearly everything else, the generator is captured. The garage might appear makeshift, but it is in fact extremely efficient. Their assorted collection of Fiats, Bedfords, Mercedes, American Mack trucks are regularly serviced. The spares are cannibalized or made on the spot. The mechanics work long hours, but are expected to fight as well. Where did you get this machine from?
This machine, we took it from the liberated area of Massawa. In the night time we go there, and they will put it in our lorry by manpower and we take it outside.
Just like that?
Like that, yes.
So whenever you want a modern machine lathe like this or any other equipment, you just mount an operation into one of the cities held by the Ethiopians and take it out?
Yes.
It is perhaps the thoroughness of their organization that's been the key to their success. Hidden in the valleys, buried deep in the more inaccessible areas of Eritrea, a complex system of interlocking underground base camps, not just in support of the war, but as part of a behind-the-line civilian administration. The EPLF Information Department. Fighters rotated from the front man the duplicators. In February alone, they produced 4 different political magazines, 500,000 bus tickets, 40 editions of their school textbooks, and the first water and electricity bills. Not a mile or so away, a typing school, currently training 10 new typists a week. And they have to learn to type in English and Arabic as well as their own language, Tigrinya. And part of the same camp, a carpentry shop. It has 30 skilled carpenters, many of them taught after they had joined the front. They repair and renovate rifles, again, mostly captured. They also provide the hospitals with equipment, produce furniture, and with the help of the engineering department next door, have started to manufacture artificial limbs. Like everybody else in the support camps, they work from 6 to 11 in the morning and 4 to 7 in the afternoon, and are expected to go through at least 6 months of military training first. It's during this period that the fighters receive what is considered to be the most essential part of their education. Be it Mao or Marx, the setting is African, a philosophy tailored to the needs of one of the poorest corners of the continent, and the traditional demand for victory to the people. Much colonial blood has been spilt in Eritrea. It was the British, helped by Sudanese and Indian troops, who drove out the Italians during the Second World War, who stormed the same Italian-built fort outside the city of
Yeah, that was just it was meant to be a small clip to kind of show, once again, like I mentioned, and honestly, what Ambassador Sophia had talked a lot about was the level of organization that was necessary politically, and just how they were able to put that together with nearly, absolutely no resources. Like, that's not only innovative, that's incredible, that's revolutionary. So I thought that was important to show. But we have one of our next special speakers. His name is Alula Fresgi. If you could come up. So Alula Fresgi was born and raised in Asmara, where he attended primary and secondary school. He joined the struggle in 1976 at 20 years old, where he went through political training in cadre school. He taught others and was also a member of the Liberation Army until 1981. He left Eritrea, pursued studies in Egypt, and moved to New York in 1983, where he has been a resident since. So excited to have Alula. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolian, for inviting me. I think before I start talking briefly, I would like to mention about all the martyrs of Eritrea. I will try to take this in Tigrinya slowly. እዚ ሎ መዓልቲ ተኣኪብናዮ ዘለና ብመስዋእቲ ናይቶም ጀጋኑና ስለ ዝኾነ ብመጀመርያ ንዕኦም ክብርን ዝኽርን ይሰምዓዮም ይብል። I mean, this event is happened by all the sacrifices that our former combatants, former fighters have done to the country. And that's why it's because of them that we are celebrating this 32nd Eritrean Independence anniversary. This was mentioned. I was born in Asmara and raised. I went to school in the middle school and senior high school, Prince Mokonnen, in the early 70s, around 74. And at the time, the Derg regime, or the hierarchy, the 28 assemblymen of the Ethiopian regime was dictating the country, ruling the country. At early age, I was told that there was a unique country called Eritrea, and this country has been went through all types of colonialism, and attention of this nation came especially after they built the Suez Canal of Egypt, and then Eritrea was in a very pivotal and strategic area by the Red Sea. So all the former colonies tried to conquer and colonize this country, starting with the Ottoman Empire, as His Excellency Ambassador Sophia Tesfamariam mentioned. I don't want to dwell on it again. And until today, the magnitude of Eritrea, even though the imperialists are trying to belittle and demonize this country is in a big strategic area. The reason that I tried to join the army was due to its history and the annexation and the subversion of the Ethiopian government. At early age, I was trying to go to the EPLF when I was around 16 or 17 years old. I went to the nearest outskirts of Adi Nifas called Risa Adi with my good friend and colleague Emmanuel Bene. And at the time, the EPLF fighters told me that, hey, you are too little, you are not strong. And as a matter of fact, I was like a toothpick, and then they told me, go eat kicha more, and then you can come back after a couple of years. But they took my good friend Emmanuel Bene, and you know, he was a martyr, and I always remember him. After that, you know, we boycott the Derg's or the ruling party's campaign for progress. They call it in Amharic, Edget Behebret Yeukatina Isra Zemacha. And then we boycotted, and in the 74, 75, 1974 to 1975, the Eritrean Liberation Front and the EPLF were in the nearest area of Asmara, both of them. And people were trying to pay attention and join the struggle. So due to this situation, the ruling junta or the ruling government was assassinating a lot of people in the outskirts of Asmara. As I recall, the massacre in Wakadibba, they almost killed more than 150 peasants, innocent civilians. And the emotion, the consciousness, and the nationalism of me and my colleagues start from this situation. And once I attempted to go to the field, and then I met people in Asmara and joined the clandestine movement from 1975 up to 1976. And the journey of my struggle is not too much to brag about. You know, it's a short period of time. You know, I've been there from 1976 up to 1981. So comparing with all these senior war veterans of EPLF, until today, even the president himself, I am nobody. So I'm very humbled and honored to say something today by the organizing committee. And I could mention something that I make a note on what it drives us on this thing. For the last 30 years of our armed struggle, the exploitation and suppression of the Ethiopian occupationist regime, Emperor Haile Selassie and the Derg, with the help of imperialist masters, have attempted to crush the Eritrean people's national aspirations, and even more, to wipe out the cultural identity of the Eritrean people, to forcibly assimilate And Amharism, I don't have any grudge against the Amhara people nowadays, but that was the ruling majority at the time. But the assimilation policies of the Ethiopian regime, however, did not succeed in suppressing the ardent patriotism of the Eritrean people. The Eritrean people never accepted the expansionist claim that Eritrea was one of the provinces of Ethiopia. They were considering it part of the 14 provinces of Ethiopia. Thank you. So we are the Eritreans never felt like Ethiopians from the get-go, because from what we hear from our parents, our neighbors, our brothers and sisters, the older ones, they told us all kinds of history, and this got into our mind and psyche, and that's how it drives us to join the Eritrean Liberation Movement. The Eritrean National Liberation Movement is one of the huge movements in the world liberation movements, and honestly, the thing, as the chairman Mao Zedong said, the correctness or incorrectness of your ideology and politics leads you towards what you do, which means if you are correct politically and ideologically, no matter how weak you are, no matter how small number you have, that it will grow. It's like a multiplying factor. And I think this is the outcome of the EPLF nowadays, what we see. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much, Alula. I just wanted, since I had you, I think your story is incredible, and thank you for that. One of the things I wanted to ask, especially for the people here who generally either come to People's Forum events or are curious about the organizing efforts of the Eritrean people, you mentioned some of the things that prompted you to join the struggle for independence. When you did end up joining the army, you mentioned going through some political training. What was that like? Was that the first thing you had to do before you joined the army? You can explain kind of what that process was like.
Yeah, when I got a member of the clandestine movement in Asmara. At the time I was working in the municipality of Asmara, and I was meeting with all the freedom fighters inside the city. So at one time, the committee, the clandestine committee, asked me to go outside of Asmara and get training. So I went to the nearest area, I think a village called Adish Magile, and I got trained politically and some, how to minor military, how to shoot the gun, how to reassemble it and stuff. And secretly I went back to Asmara. And after that, I tried to do all kinds of activities that the front asked me to do, organizing the people, collecting money, making some type of feasibility studies on the ongoing operations in the city. And I don't want to be specific, but a lot of my friends have been killed on duty in the clandestine movement. I would like to mention some names like Sagid Mazanga. He was a good friend of mine. He was a comrade, a colleague, a famous basketball player in Asmara by the name Bokhretien. He was tall. We used to call him like Jabbar, Abdul Jabbar. And they killed him too. In the municipality of Asmara, a good friend of mine, Afor Kehailu, God bless him, was in prison with his gun, and then he lost his life in prison. And so many friends that I can say, all these Fedain or former freedom fighters in Asmara. After this, I mean, things came to myself. They were looking for me, so I have to run from the city and join the Eritrean Liberation Army.
Well, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And lastly, what message, if any, do you have for the diaspora, for young organizers that are attempting to struggle for a better world today?
Well, today is a really amazing day for me. Actually, I am emotionally elated. It seems to me like the first day of 1991 when Eritrea was liberated. At the time, I was in Ottawa, Canada, on a visit with a friend. The friend of mine was born in Ethiopia. So when I heard from BBC that Eritrea has become liberated, I was just weeping. I was crying like crazy. And the guy couldn't understand me. I said, why are you crying instead of being happy? And he says, well, I should be in the city, or I should have paid my price. So all these years has happened, and to see my country got liberated makes me very emotional at the time. And that was, and today, as you can see, guys, with all the efforts of our leaders, Eritrea is shining, and her enemies are whining as usual. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Alula. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, great.
I just want to mention something. When I was working in the UN, I remember Mr. Samir Sambar. When I see him, I did went to work with the UN for the last 10 years. And at the time, Mr. Samir Sambar, if you remember it, the ongoing, before the referendum was going on, it was first committee, second committee, third committee, fourth committee. And even my guys, my leaders didn't even have an office in the area like what our ambassador has now. So they were working closely, hiding in at UNDP with us. And I was going back and forth, beside what I should do for the UNDP, I was doing for the Eritrean struggle. I remember former Colonel Goshu Wolde came with 4 buses of loads of bus of Ethiopians from DC and 4 loads of buses from Boston, Massachusetts, just to confront us, and that not only the Eritreans has to be vote on this referendum, but the Ethiopians has to be questioned too. They should have a right to vote. And this was, prolonging the process for about 4 or 5 days. Finally, they gave up and they went, and the fourth committee, standing committee, all the procurements has been done, and Mr. Samir Sambar became the great chairman of our referendum. I did mention that when I see him because it was so symbolic. Even though, we won the war, but legitimately, we won the nation through a referendum. And I thank you, and good to see you.
Thank you so much, Alula. That was absolutely inspiring. Our next speaker, because I know we're a little low on time, is an amazing organizer, geopolitical analyst, and journalist. His name is Elias Amare. He was the former editor at the publishing houses of Red Sea Press and Africa World Press. He is also a founding member of the Asmara-based Peace Building Center for the Horn of Africa, a veteran political activist of the Eritrean struggle who was in the leadership of the EPLF mass organizations in North America in the 1980s, member of the Central Council of the National Union of Eritrean Workers, and from 1993 to 95, served as Communications Secretary and Cultural Attaché of the newly established Eritrean Embassy in the US. I think this is really exciting to have Elias on, particularly because he has incredible experiences organizing in the States. So questions around what it means to be involved in a struggle across the pond, I mean, you have to direct them at Elias. So thank you so much for being here, Elias.
Thank you for having me, Yodian. Dear friends and comrades, I feel honored and privileged at being invited here at the People's Forum to share with you my modest experience in Eritrea's struggle for liberation, social justice, and development on this momentous occasion of the 32nd anniversary of Eritrea's Independence Day. So I say to all the Eritrean peoples around the world and friends of Eritrea, Happy Independence Day. Well, by way of epigraph, let me quote a poem from one of my favorite poets, the Chilean Pablo Neruda, because I'm asked here to tell my experience in the struggle, and that's the story of my life. And this short poem of Pablo Neruda kind of summarizes my feeling. It's one of his last poems, and it says simply, "Pardon me if when I want to tell the story of my life, it is the land I talk about. This is the land. It grows in your blood and you grow. If it dies in your blood, you die out." It's a very powerful poem. It kind of tells the story of my life because, well, I was born the year the armed struggle of Eritrea for national liberation was launched. That's in 1961. So that gives you an idea how old I am. I'm not young anymore, but I feel young at heart to recall the long journey, the glorious struggle that Eritrea went through thick and thin, the ups and downs of his struggle, 30 years of armed struggle, and then the post-independence period of the past 32 years. If you sum it up, it really, really is a very unique struggle. And it was a great honor, privilege for me to be involved in organizing the people here in North America in the EPLF mass organizations. The EPLF, that is the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, was extremely serious, the task of organizing the people, the masses. Its slogan from its inception in the beginning in 1971, you have to remember that the EPLF split off from the older ELF, which started the struggle in 1961 up to 1971, and then the EPLF split from that older organization because the demands for a progressive vision of the struggle to unify the people, not along ethnic, sectarian, divisive lines, but to rally the people with workers, peasants, participation, and also have a progressive vision. That was the main vision of the EPLF from the get-go, from its inception in 1971. So its slogan at that time was politicize, organize, and arm the masses. So the task of raising the political consciousness of its fighters, its combatants, was given primacy, priority, eradicating illiteracy from the ranks of the rank and file of its fighters, and then having regular political education was a must, and by extension also raising the political consciousness of the masses, people, the peasants, the workers, women, students, what have you. And it's one of its secrets why it triumphed against all odds was because it tenaciously stuck to this principle of politicizing, organizing, and arming the masses throughout its long struggle as a vanguard. And so here in the United States, in the 1970s, there was a students' movement called Eritreans for Liberation in North America, which later morphed into EPLF mass organizations. When we say mass organizations, that includes women organized under the umbrella of the National Union of Eritrean Women, youth and students organized under the umbrella of the National Union of Eritrean Youth and Students, peasants organized under the umbrella of National Union of Eritrean Peasants, and last but not least, the National Union of Eritrean Workers as well. And this task of organizing the masses inside the country, behind the enemy lines, in the cities controlled by the enemy, by the Ethiopian military, in the diaspora, whether it's inside Ethiopia, in Sudan, in the Middle East, in Europe, in North America, in Australia, this task we took very, very seriously. And so through its core principle of self-reliance, funds were raised by the Eritrean masses outside. Task of publicity work and international relations was also carried out by these mass organizations. We had chapters all in many cities in the US and Canada, and I traveled all over. And occasionally we sent delegations to the Congress of these national unions, of the mass organizations, or even the EPLF itself. So when the EPLF held its first organizational Congress in 1977, a delegation from the United States, a delegation of what was then the EFLNA, the Eritreans for Liberation in North America, went and participated in that Congress. And some from that rank were also elected to the Central Committee. The late Ambassador Girma Asmarom, for example, who was Ambassador Sophia's predecessor at the UN, he himself was, lived and studied in the US and then joined the struggle after that EPLF Congress. People like Yamane Gebrab and many others, some from the Soviet Union and the Eastern camp, some from from European universities, some from Ethiopian universities. So you had this dynamic linkage between the masses and the vanguard organization. In the US also, we organized along professional association lines. For example, Eritrean Medical Association of doctors, nurses did a lot in raising funds to send medical supplies and equipment to the EPLF. You saw briefly in the video that Julian showed us at the beginning that in the liberated zone of Eritrea, which I was fortunate to witness in 1988 when I went as as a delegate to attend the National Union of Eritrean Workers Congress in Sahel. You had vast networks of underground hospitals, factories. The EPLF really believed in self-reliance. So it had its own hospital networks, barefoot doctors to carry out public health, in the rural areas to the peasants, small-scale factories, even pharmaceuticals that produce tablets for malaria and other communicable disease. And it was really, really amazing that the EPLF, in fact, had formed a quasi-government in the liberated zone way before formal independence in 1991. So this is the kind of organizational work that we did here in the United States to assist the struggle, to form linkage with progressive organizations, to raise political awareness among broad Eritrean masses. For example, the EPLF clandestine radio station that was established in 1979, the funds for it, the technical know-how was raised from Eritreans in the United States. They sent equipment, the radio equipment, the broadcasters and journalists and what have you. So towards the end, as liberation neared and news was moving fast, the news of the armed struggle, that the enemy was encircled in few cities around Asmara. We had to follow the news every day. So what we did from the United States was we would make a telephone call to Saudi Arabia, Jizan, where a comrade there would record the radio broadcast, our broadcast every day. So we would record it here on cassette tapes. Those were the days of cassette tapes for the young who might not know. And then we would transcribe it that very same day and type it up and convert it into a newsletter format. And those were the days of the fax. So we would disseminate it to all chapters. If in this way, our people were kept abreast of developments, important political editorials, military achievements, and so on and so forth. So these were the kind of tasks that we were engaged in. Of course, there was the Eritrean Relief Committee also that did work in raising humanitarian assistance for the war-injured population, the drought victims, and so on and so forth. So when independence came about in 1991, one of the first tasks that we undertook was when our members visited Eritrea, free Eritrea, they saw the devastation of the war-ravaged economy, the victims of the war, 65,000 martyrs, combatants, EPLF combatants had been killed in action. That's martyrs, we call them. And so the task of assisting their families fell on the new government of Eritrea. On top of that, the economy was totally destroyed. And so we mobilized the grassroots to suggest that we have some kind of 2% reconstruction and rehabilitation tax. So that tax, that a lot of demonization is carried about from Western media and Western governments, was a voluntary tax that came from the bottom up, from the grassroots. And then organizing the referendum here in the diaspora was another task in the first 2 years between 1991 and 1993, the Eritrean ID cards. And in 1993, the referendum was carried out smoothly. And so, the referendum 30 years ago was carried out inside Eritrea, in Ethiopia, in Sudan, and all the places where Eritreans are. And there was no surprise that the overwhelming majority of the Eritrean people voted 99.8% for independence. And in this way, the right of the Eritrean people for self-determination was realized legally in a just way. So I recall then, 30 years ago today, I had the great honor to be part of the official delegation of Eritrea to the United Nations headquarters in New York City, not far from where you are, on May 28, 1993, when Eritrea's independence was formally recognized and Eritrea was officially accepted to be part of the UN Community of Independent Nations. So after the short ceremony inside the General Assembly Hall, we were then taken outside where the flags of all nations are. And as the flag of Eritrea was raised, it was for me personally, a tremendous feeling of great emotions, the sacrifices made, the tens of thousands of freedom fighters martyred, the hundreds of thousands of civilians victims to the war and all that. And without realizing it, as the flag of Eritrea reached the top of the mast, I realized that tears were flowing down my cheeks. A very, very emotional moment, that is, to recall. And so I also recall to you, I'm wrapping up. I have maybe if I could be indulged for about 2 minutes, Yolian. 4 days to that event, prior to that event where we went to the United Nations and Eritrea was accepted formally as a member of the UN. On May 24, 1993, in the Eritrean capital of Asmara, President Isaias Afwerki had declared a few minutes before midnight, midnight of May 24, that is. And he said the following words: today is a momentous occasion because thanks to the previous sacrifices of our best sons and daughters and the determination and hard work of our people, we are formally declaring our independence and raising our national flag, the symbol of our sovereignty. The independence that will be officially declared at midnight, said President Isaias, and I continue, on this historic day, and which will always be remembered in our history, signifies the end of the injustices meted to the Eritrean people through the denial of their basic national rights. True, the waiting has been long and the plight they were forced to endure has been bitter. But at last, justice has prevailed. Our flag has been raised on the imperishable pole of truth. In that historic speech, President Isaias also emphasized the following vision of Eritrea. And he said, as he concluded his speech, we have never wavered in our understanding that peace, justice, democracy, and economic development that we seek to promote in Eritrea is closely interrelated with development elsewhere in our region, that is the Horn of Africa region at large. No country can seek peace and economic development by building walls around itself. The countries of this region are no exception. In this spirit, we have already begun to use what capacity we have to foster economic cooperation between ourselves and our neighbors. Close ties exist between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Severing them will not serve the interests of either peoples. From today, we can promote a relationship based on free choice, mutual respect, and common interest of both peoples. The people and government of Eritrea cherish this relationship. It is amazing. In a way, it reminded me of what Cabral said in Amilcar Cabral said in 1973, as the people of Guinea-Bissau were about to end their armed national struggle. He said, we began this armed struggle with no hatred towards the Portuguese people, and we are ending it with no hatred towards the Portuguese people either. Forgive me, it was not Amílcar Cabral, but rather his brother, because Amílcar Cabral was assassinated, unfortunately, a few months before the independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. So it was in this spirit then that President Isaias was saying that we have no ill will, animosity towards the people of Ethiopia. We're working, we're going to work closely for greater economic integration and cooperation and integration. This vision of Eritrea of a new Horn of Africa as a region at peace with itself and working towards a win-win greater economic cooperation and integration has remained remarkably consistent over the past 3 decades, for Eritrea that is. And even during its armed struggle, Eritrea had always this consistent vision that saw beyond flag independence and greater cooperation of the peoples of the region. Here is what President Isaias Afwerki said in his keynote address on Eritrea's 32nd anniversary of independence earlier today in Asmara. And I'm quoting from his speech today on the occasion of the 32nd independence anniversary that he gave at Asmara Stadium. Quote, as I underlined in my message of last year, deploy that the forces of global domination, principally the Washington clique and its Western allies, have employed against our liberation and independence for the past 80 years, that entangled 3 generations of our people, is to drive a wedge between Ethiopia and Eritrea and to instigate war between them incessantly. The peoples and nations of Africa, and naturally the peoples and nations of the Horn of Africa, need to cultivate and bolster both continental and regional frameworks of integration in order to preserve their independence and sovereignty. This is not an option, but an obligation. This is precisely the reason why the government of Eritrea has exerted in the past 30 years relentless efforts for sustainable and common economic growth, to promote stability, to combat terrorism and other acts of subversion, and for regional integration. End of quote. It's amazing, remarkable, consistent throughout. And this was one of the core principles of the EPLF through the phase of the national liberation struggle. If you examine its documents, its political program of 1977, the first Congress, of 1987, the second Congress, the National Charter, the third Congress of the EPLF/PFDJ, this kind of remarkable consistency in its vision in terms of regional cooperation, solidarity, and integration that saw beyond borders, beyond the pitfalls of national consciousness, in the words of Frantz Fanon, has been very, very consistent for the Eritrean struggle. Of course, its vision of social justice, economic development, self-reliance has also been consistent. And that is why, to this day, because Eritrea would not betray the aims of the revolution that is being constantly demonized, hounded, sanctioned by imperialism. But Eritrea has emerged triumphant and is now a shining beacon, as its national anthem says. Eritrea, the beacon of the oppressed, has proven to the world that truth triumphs in the end. And so with that message of solidarity and optimism of the will, I end my brief remarks here. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elias, for that remarkable statement. And it really goes to show how important political consciousness was to the people and the level of mass organization that happened not only just in Eritrea, but also here and in Europe and wherever the Eritrean community was. And I think that's incredibly important and insightful as young organizers today. So thank you so much, Elias. So we do, we're running a little bit low on time, and we do still have one more speaker. I'm wondering, as we, have food as well, and I don't know if who got a chance to have some of our traditional coffee. Anybody? Some of our coffee? Yeah. Okay. Great. Awesome. So yeah, I think what we can do is maybe start having food be set up, and then we'll have Simon, our last speaker, come kind of talk about what all of this means and why it's relevant today, and what are we going to do with this information after today. And then take some questions, and we'll just have some, we'll eat and have some music, and this is great. Just celebrate. How does that sound? Is everyone cool with that? Okay, awesome. Once again, thank you so much to the National Union of Eritrean Women and National Council of Eritrean Americans for organizing this and really helping to support bringing all the food and provisions. So thank you so much. So we can get that starting to set up, and then I will slowly ask for Rose to hop in line and grab food as we have Simon Tesfamariam speaking here in a bit. So just a little bit on Simon. So Simon Tesfamariam is the executive director of the New Africa Institute. He also was one of the co-founders of that hashtag No More. Y'all probably saw that around for the past couple of years. And that caused quite a stir, which was really incredible as it had joined a lot of struggles across the continent and the diaspora. He has written and produced documentary films on a range of Eritrean issues, including sanctions, healthcare, migration, human rights, economic security, and media. He holds a medical degree from Duke University School of Medicine and has worked as an adjunct professor at the University of Asmara from 2015 to 2017. So what we'll have Simon do is really speak about what to do with, the past, our revolutionary history, what challenges we're facing in the present, and what can we do about this moving forward in the future and preserving not only just our independence, but maintaining that sense of internationalism that Eritrea and the Eritrean people have always really had. So welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Yohan. And I want to thank the People's Forum. I want to thank NCEA, the National Council of Eritrean Americans, and excuse me, the National Council of, the Women's Organization. Today made this wonderful coffee, wonderful food. The New York community, everybody for coming out, thank you so much. As you saw with everybody who just spoke, the younger generation of Eritreans are standing on this on the backs of giants, on the shoulders of giants. It took a lot to liberate Eritrea. We have 65,000 martyrs. And then on top of that, after the 1998 to 2000 war, almost 20,000, an additional 20,000 had passed away. So we have to acknowledge our martyrs, and we're very thankful for everything they've done to liberate Eritrea, to defend Eritrea. And then we had this follow-up war, excuse me, again, in northern Ethiopia, in Tigray. Eritreans, as Ambassador Sophia said, were there to support. So the Eritrean struggle is something that is very important and very relevant today. So I want to kind of just go back into like my own personal history and talk about what it was for me, the connection of Eritrean liberation in 1991 to today, what it means to me today, and sort of what it means to my generation, those who were born, I'm an 80s baby, so those who were born just before liberation, but also after liberation. So I need to sort of set the context a little bit. So what happened was that A lot of people don't really understand the Eritrean struggle. We hear about Cuba, we hear about Vietnam, we hear about China, these incredible struggles, people's struggles, where the people were armed in a people's war, liberated their countries, and then, excuse me, and then basically forwarded international people's struggle, people fighting for liberation around the world. And so Eritrea is one of those nations. It's one of the 4 great people struggles of the world. Not saying there aren't, there was the Haitian struggle, the Soviet Union, all these incredible struggles, but for some reason, the Eritrean struggle is kind of overlooked. And I've always wondered, why is that the case? Why is the Eritrean struggle overlooked? And one of the reasons why is because of the fact that Eritrea in 1977 was almost liberated. But what happened was that just a year later, the Soviet Union came in and provided support for the Derg regime at the time. Mengistu was the leader. And what that did was that actually set back Eritrean liberation until 1991. And so $11 billion went into the Derg to support them against the Eritrean struggle, unfortunately. And imagine, you're a young progressive movement fighting for liberation, a just cause in the world, and you have the Soviet Union, this very powerful force in the international left, which all of a sudden now is supporting the Derg against you. $11 billion were put into Ethiopia at that time. Compare that with Afghanistan, because remember they say that Afghanistan was what led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. 15 billion was put into Afghanistan, so very comparable. And the struggle, and those 2 wars happened around the same, or excuse me, Soviet support for these countries happened around the same time. So I want to just show that the Soviet Union, the center of the left in the world, one of the nodes, was now all of a sudden against the Eritrean struggle. And so that confused many leftists around the world. And so this led a lot of people astray. And so people didn't really recognize the Eritrean struggle. They didn't know about it. So Eritreans had to look inwardly within themselves to liberate the country. And as you saw with the video, some of these testimonies that we've heard today about what it took, the sacrifice, this is something that we had to do internally. We had to look within ourselves. So there's always this feeling of like, we're doing this, we have the world kind of against us. And so it was against all odds that we were able to liberate ourselves. So then in 1991, you would think, okay, liberation comes. So you would think that, okay, the world is going to be supporting the new, the struggle of the Eritrean people. And things were actually going good between 1991 and 1997. Eritrea became the fastest growing economy in the world. I mean, one of the fastest growing economies in the world at 7 to 8% growth. But then what happened was that in 1998, we went to war again. And since 1998, there was an isolation strategy against Eritrea. And this isolation strategy, as Mullah Zenawi later said in 2005, was to isolate Eritrea and then to wait for the economy to collapse. And so what this meant, just think of it like this. You have this country of 20 times the size of Eritrea, who then is, it's the head of the AU, and they're trying to isolate Eritrea. So you have remember, all these countries in the all the countries of the AU at the time, before that it was called the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. What happened was that, as Edmund Keller said from UCLA, he was a professor at UCLA, he was the head of the African Studies Association in the United States, that in 1999, he said on NPR, if Africans had a choice, they would actually wish to reverse Eritrean sovereignty, that they would wish that Eritrea and Ethiopia would be one country again. This is the head of the African Studies Association. And so the AU, and this, he said that specifically within the context of the OAU. So what I'm trying to say, the point I'm trying to make is that post 1991, that the reason why we don't really hear about Eritrea, we don't know about the Eritrean story, is because of the fact that there was this war with Eritrea and Ethiopia. And Ethiopia's leaders at that time were trying to isolate Eritrea and say that nobody can talk to Eritrea. If you talk to Eritrea, you're not going to do business with 100 million people that we have in our country. You're going to be boxed out of the AU. And then, as I mentioned before, during the 80s, the Soviet Union was there, confusing progressives around the world. So throughout this entire period, what you had was basically this confusion about Eritrea, about the Eritrean liberation struggle. So now we fast forward to 2018. There was peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. With that, the peace, for the first time, allowed a lot of the world to start engaging Eritrea. Why? Because of the fact that you have now Ethiopians, not just Ethiopians, Somalis, Sudanese, a lot of different people within the Horn of Africa saying, let's engage Eritrea. The people of the Horn of Africa see what Eritrea is doing in the Eritrean project, that product of Eritrean liberation. And I'll give you examples. Today, looking at Eritreans celebrating in Addis Ababa, just a perfect example. You see this massive population of Eritreans and Ethiopians and all the different ambassadors at the AU celebrating. And you would have almost thought this was unthinkable many years ago. But the reason why that's the case is because of the fact that now the Ethiopian people, the various countries of Africa are now, they can engage Eritrea without drawing the hostilities from Ethiopia. So that's a very big thing. And so that allows us today to be able to go out and tell our stories to the world. A lot of people have eyes on Eritrea and interest in Eritrea. And again, this is a product of our liberation struggle. So I think something that would be sort of helpful to sort of make the connection between 1991 when liberation came and then sort of today in terms of 80s babies, 90s babies, 2000s babies that are continuing the struggle. So for me, I want to say, I'll give you my personal experience, what it was like growing up, and just to see why is it that Eritreans are able to continue struggling, whether they're in the diaspora or back at home, but I'll give you specifically my experience in the diaspora. So my father left Eritrea in 1979, very hostile time. As I said, the Soviet Union had just come in. And at the time, a lot of people were coming to the United States, and my father makes it eventually and my mother make it to LA, South Central LA. At one point, we had 7 people living in a household together, and 7 people living in a household in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I remember just the communal life, everybody working together, bringing money home, and then it's collective finances. So many Eritreans were doing that same thing at that time, living in these conditions where you have multiple families living in 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom households, and then a lot of them are sending their money back home to the front, and sending it back to support the struggle. And you see, the hospitals that were built underground, the machines that were brought to Eritrea, all these different things through ERA, and all these different organizations that we had. And so what I'm saying is that you learn early on, sort of just living communally, like all this kind of stuff. It's a very common immigrant story. But the difference with Eritreans is that we were connected to a struggle back home. We were anchored to something. And so so you had this sort of organizational infrastructure that had existed in the diaspora. We built these organizations. And my dad, my mom, they were part of these organizations. And so what eventually happened was that we were able to, so my mom, my dad were part of all these different organizations. And we eventually, we began to, so what happened was we eventually began to um, we had various organizations, youth organizations that we were part of, and so what I'm trying to say, sorry, yeah. Yeah. So let me just say, my organizing history, it goes back, me personally, I was in college. I had read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I had read, so many different books related to revolutionary organizing and all this type of stuff. But I wonder, where did that come from? That came from our household. In our household, every Eritrean had, there's all these conversations about the struggle, all these conversations about, the books, the infrastructure was there. And so from this, we were able to pick stuff up about the revolutionary thinking excuse me, in the United States. And so, anyway,
Yeah. Okay. We're going to go ahead and wrap up so that we can have a Q&A that's better format, so we can really be able to facilitate and have some questions that can really speak to all three of your speakers' experiences. And so if we can have Her Excellency Ambassador Sophia, if you can come up over here, as well as Lula Fresky, please come up as well. So what we're going to do is have 3 questions. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Simon.
okay.
And then Elias is up here as well. So we're going to have Meron. Hey, Meron. We're going to have Meron come around. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. And she'll come. It could be, towards the group. It could be a general question. It could be about any of their personal experiences. So we'll do that. And then, we have one over here. And then we'll start calling people. Folks can start getting food. So,
thank you. روحوا اسبوع على النت. Happy Independence Day to everyone. I think as an Eritrean and a daughter of revolutionaries, we always discuss the 30 years of armed struggle. But I think as the youth and what we've seen, especially in the past decades, has been the betrayal of Eritreans towards the country itself, which I think has been probably the most astounding moment in our history, to say the least. And I think it would be great to discuss the last 30 years of our history, right? What has happened? How did we actually circumvent the sanctions? What were some of our struggles? And I think it would be great if we could discuss in more details what were the struggles that Eritrea was in, what were the implications of neo-colonial parties that were acting in our nations and in our surrounding areas, and how did Eritrea actually mitigate those conditions, because where we are right now is unconceivable, to say the least. So it would be great to hear from Mama Sophia and our veterans for what we've done for the past 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And you're talking about my life, right? And Elias's life. Hello, Elias. He was my mentor, and he was our teacher when we were in Washington and New York, and not knowing anything about what the struggle was. So it was thanks to folks like Elias that we got to know a little bit about the struggle. But the last 20 years, in addition to all the hostilities with the United States and our neighbors in Ethiopia, we also had internal problems. And to us, for Eritreans, I think that was the most difficult, because you can insult, you can hit, you can call names to people who are not of yours. It was easy to yell at the United States and say, "How dare you?" You can call Ethiopians and say, "How dare you? How could you do this to us? How could you do?" But it was very difficult for us to come to terms with Eritreans undermining the struggle, undermining the nation-building enterprise, undermining the leadership, undermining our communities, attacking our communities. And of late, before it used to be verbal, and maybe we see a few articles that called us a few choice words. But in the last couple of years, I think, we're actually seeing physical violence against the communities. We're seeing our mothers, like these women who come to the festivals early to prepare the festivals and prepare the functions, being attacked by young men with guns and sticks and mace and all kinds of stuff that we've never seen in the whole 30-year struggle of independence, even with the most hostile populations. I think the most hostility that we saw during the struggle was probably running away from immigration if they came and found out that we didn't have papers to live here. You're working in a restaurant and you see an immigration officer coming through the front door, so you run out through the back door and see how far you can go. But now we're running away from Eritreans who are actually committing heinous crimes against other Eritreans. And I don't know where that came from, but it came around the time that we had the war with the TPLF. And it was an organized group of this latest 2 years. Our own internal, and we started off, Elias and I remember those days vividly, and I'm sure you do too. Very shocking days. It was in the later months of September, October, I'm thinking, in 2001. And we all woke up to this open letter to the president of Eritrea from, what do they call themselves? Academics and professionals, right? What was it? Academics and professionals. How pompous, and they wanted, we still didn't bury our martyrs yet. We hadn't even announced the number that we had lost in the war with Ethiopia. We still have Ethiopian forces occupying our territories. Yes, the guns stopped on June 18th, but the hurt was still there. The hurt was still fresh. This agreement was just signed. You don't know which way it's going to go. And they had this open letter demanding things from the government of Eritrea, and specifically the president of the country. And it was a frontal attack on a leader who was in charge of a people who were in hurt. We were not just relaxing and enjoying an Independence Day parade when we got that letter. It was in the middle of this very sad event, and I think almost immediately, it was a knee-jerk reaction from the Eritrean diaspora, and they rejected it outright and said, whatever your issues are, it can wait till this thing with Ethiopia and the border conflict is done. And a few months later, we got another bigger shock. We got a letter, open letter again, this time from the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, and addressed to the people and government of Eritrea again. And this time it was from high-level officials within the Eritrean government. And of course, the funny diaspora was good at labels. So we named the Berlin academics who went to Berlin and had their midnight meeting secretly to discuss our future, the Berlin 13. And then we labeled the government members the G15. I think those were the most difficult times for Eritreans in the diaspora, and it still is. It's still difficult for us. And that, and it'll be funny to note that Martin Plaut of the BBC was also there at that time talking about this movement of the government officials, and he called it the reform movement. I'm like, okay, how do you reform something that hasn't even begun to be established? We had barely finished writing the Constitution, and then here we are, asking us to talk about a reform movement, which also was summarily rejected by the Eritrean diaspora and, of course, the Eritrean people too. But I'm sure you probably have no more to say on that than I would. And of course, we continue to fight till today the ramifications of what took place post G15 and Berlin 13 movement.
Yeah, you can listen to the ambassador. She's giving you a good hint on what happened. If I can add some more, I think what the question to be addressed by me is like, why is this happening every now and then? Why Eritrea? Why all the sanctions? Why all these demonizations? Like Eritrea, the North Korea of Africa. I think, in my opinion, it's the value of Eritrea and the way the West try to demonize us is because Eritrea is in a very pivotal strategic area, and the value of Eritrea is tremendous. Tremendous resource, tremendous implications, and the ideology of self-reliance being a beacon of hope to the third world countries. That's what they don't want. So all these oligarchies are trying to suppress us, to isolate us, to demonize us, and doing all kinds of conspiracies. And we have seen that. I mean, up to 1997, the diplomatic relationship with the US was kind of cordial, but and then they start something like, the USAID was trying to give some aids to the government, and based on their ideological concept, the leaders of Eritrea say, okay, we have this type of projects, and they're trying to accept the aid, but the USAID say, no, we have to do it. Well, if that's the case, then, you can take your money and go. And then, all these things brewed. And then the war starts with the Wayane regime, the TPLF at the time. And then it was all orchestrated by the US government. Again, until now, all the proxy war that was going on is, to belittle Eritrea and to, to subjugate it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I know we're running low on time. So does anyone have one more question? And then we'll start. Oh.
Can you just explain me, so the Soviet Union supported Ethiopia, and who was backing Eritrea? So, because I understood it's like proxy war, proxy, this usual conflicts. So big power use advantages of the small countries, but can you shortly explain the situation? Who was behind the Eritrea? Who was behind the Ethiopia?
Yeah, I understand that can be confusing. I'd love for Elias to really answer that question. Provide us a brief overview, because it often gets confused.
Well, very complex question. It's not as simple as it looks. As my brother, Comrade Simon, had hinted in his presentation earlier, when the Soviet Union and the Eastern Camp switched sides from supporting Somalia in the Horn of Africa to supporting the Derg regime in Ethiopia, it was a shock to the Eritrean revolution. because the Eritrean revolutionaries had always assumed that the Soviets and the socialist camp had supported Eritrea's right to self-determination in the 1940s, when the issue came up in the United Nations, the late 1940s, 49, 1950, I'm talking about. On record, Soviet Union and its allies had supported the right of the Eritrean people to self-determination. So what happened? It was strategic considerations of a superpower necessitated the control of the Horn of Africa, and thus the Soviet Union, having weighed, big Ethiopia versus small Eritrea, they sacrificed the principle of rights of determination and sided with the Derg military junta of Ethiopia. Ostensibly because they claimed that the Derg was, had proclaimed socialism. The Derg had never been a socialist government. It was a military junta with a narrow base in the military officer ranks. It never had popular support. It crushed left movements such as the EPRP, Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, and the Me'eson, the All Ethiopian Socialist Movement, and other nationalist movements inside Ethiopia. Then supposedly they proposed that the Eritrean case was special, therefore they formed a peace process in East Germany, in the GDR, in 1978, between the EPLF and the Derg. But that peace process quickly unraveled into one of threats, essentially threats to the EPLF. You either submit to the Derg's regional autonomy solution, or you will be crushed militarily. Of course, the EPLF said, well, we can't sacrifice our people's right to self-determination. And so each went its own way. The Derg, with massive Soviet support, and I'm ashamed to say that Cuba also had sided with the Derg at that time. 8 huge, large-scale military offensives against the EPLF to crush the Eritrean revolution once and for all, utterly failed. The military aid from the Soviet Union to the Derg was to the tune of over $11 billion, as Simon had mentioned earlier. So who was supporting Eritrea? Nobody. Eritrea supported itself. It captured enemy tanks and turned it against the enemy. So the principle of self-reliance, the motto at that time was hit the enemy with its own guns and bullets. So tanks like T-54, T-55 capture were turned against it. When I went to Eritrea in 1988, I witnessed with my own eyes for the first time the EPLF captured a very strategic heavy artillery called BM-21, or what was then known as Stalin organ. This was multiple rocket launchers. And what amazed me was that within days of its capture, the EPLF combatants, which were some of them trained in the Soviet Union, were able to read the manual and turned that ammunition, that heavy artillery, multiple rocket launchers, against the Derg forces. So unlike in Afghanistan, which also Simon mentioned, the Afghanistan Mujahideen were supported by CIA, the Pakistani intelligence, the Saudis, and so on and so forth. Not in Eritrea, not the EPLF. The EPLF never sold out on its revolutionary principles. And to the end, it never sold out also to the imperialist camp. Elsewhere in Africa, for example, in Angola, you had the South African apartheid regime and the Americans supporting UNITA, the rebels against the MPLA. Never in Eritrea. In the end, the Cubans realized that the Eritrean problem, the Eritrean question, could not be resolved militarily. So they decided, they advised the Derg to solve this politically. The EPLF's political solution was its referendum proposal. Okay, you don't agree on the independence of the Eritrea. At least let the Eritrean people decide in a referendum. That was the proposal of 1980. The Derg regime, the military junta in Ethiopia, never refused to accept it. So in the end, the tide turned against it. The EPLF took the strategic offensive and finally militarily defeated the Derg regime in Eritrea, and with allies in Ethiopia also went all the way to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. So this is a very, very unique struggle. And there's a lot of misunderstanding in the left, in the socialist progressive movements. Personally, when I was in Eritrea, I think around 2006, I had a very long talk with a Cuban comrade who was at that time an agricultural expert who was helping in Eritrea. He decided, he argued with me that the Cuban position was, they agreed that the Eritrean case was special and that they never militarily helped the Derg in Eritrea, although they helped the Derg elsewhere in Somalia, against Somalia and so on and so forth. But they had military advisors and other kinds of support. So self-criticism or a mea culpa to this date has never been done. Eritrea's position after independence, though, was, let bygones be bygones. We are entering a new chapter. We have to, we have to accept the fact now the Eastern Soviet Union has collapsed. So it established a good diplomatic relationship with Cuba, and that relationship is growing. Cuban medical experts come to Eritrea. They help establish Eritrea's School of Medicine and so on and so forth. But we really need to do an extensive study and criticism of that period in which there was a betrayal of the Soviet Union.
Absolutely.
In 1977.
Thank you so much, Elias. That was a really, really thorough answer. I appreciate it. Okay, great. If you have any more questions, they're going to be around. We're about to eat, though. So once again, thank you so much to all the speakers. Her Excellency Sophia Tesfamariam, Lula Fresgi, former freedom fighter, Simon Tesfamariam, and Elias Amare. Thank you all so much for taking the time out here, to be here tonight and learning about the revolutionary struggle of Eritrea, and also understanding what it means to be cognizant of that in today, in this present moment, and what it means to continue to push this struggle forward. So there will be more where this comes from. I think this is the start of having popular education, series and events on Eritrea. And I hope to see you guys more often. So thank you, everyone. And I also want to recognize Mr. Samir Sanbar, who, was informed is going to be here tonight, who's the, leader, kind of saw the UN referendum actually happen, and definitely should talk to him about his experiences in Eritrea and what he has learned, and that would be great. And all of our amazing members of the community for being here tonight. So we're gonna start grabbing people. If you can kind of go in a line here, start from the front. Okay, yeah. So if y'all 2 rows can come up, and then also, of course, you guys. Okay. Thank you so much, Elias.
Thank you. عودنا عفاش. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and goodbye, comrades. Good night.
Is Joseph ready to have a heart attack?